Just a quick warning, this podcast series contains discussions about crime, trauma, sexual abuse, drug use and suicide. Listener discretion is advised. Louise Edmonds is a survivor of child sexual abuse, a child abuse advocate, the granddaughter of Australian boxing champion Tommy Burns. Louise Edmonds, welcome to the Stick Up.
I am very happy to be here, Russell.
Thank you for coming. I really appreciate the travel. Hey, let's kick off. Let's talk about your story. Where'd you grow up? And
So I grew up on the Gold Coast and beautiful 40 kilometres of white beach. But at the age of 4, I started my journey of abuse where I was sexually abused by a family member. I was 4 years old. I distinctly remember the time, the date, where, when, how, and the fear and terror that filled my body. And it went on for 5 years. And in that time, I'm a twin, so I'm a family of 5 siblings, raised by a single mum predominantly. And I grew up in the media as well. So my father was a journalist for 44 years. My grandfather was a champion Aussie boxer, welterweight boxer in the 40s and 50s, and went on to do great work in Hollywood. He was also a sports journalist. But in the time between the ages of 4 and 9, I was constantly brought back to the pedophile's house. But I was also a kid who was growing up in primary school and being bullied. But because I had a fighting spirit, I didn't tolerate that. But it was also probably because my whole body was frustrated with what was going on in the home environment, that in a little way I was outworking that in primary school. Grew up dancing, so I was a trained dancer. I did classical ballet for probably about 10 years, and that was my outlet, the physical outlet, the creative outlet from the frustration and pain of what was going on.
Often abuse survivors, through their trauma, tend to have an obsessive trait. Do you think that an obsessive trait applied to your ballet?
Interesting question. I don't have an addictive or obsessive personality. I do know other people that do and will heavily focus on certain things as an outlet. The love that I got from dancing, the freedom that I got in my body from dancing was what I truly loved and adored. And so everything was poured into that. It was my lifestyle. But I also love the beach. I also played sport at school, but ballet was something where I could artistically, and I love music. I'm such a music buff. It was a bit of an escapism, really, but I was very good at it. I was built to dance, and so I just continued to do that for many years.
Your grandfather's fighting spirit. Let's talk about that.
Yes. Look.
Who was let's explain to who your grandfather was.
Yeah, so Tommy Burns. So he was an Australian welterweight champion. He had 77 fights, 44 of those were by knockout. He was a pretty boy of boxing in the 40s and 50s. And he grew up in Mullumbimby. So he's born
in... I love Mullumbimby. I'm there every weekend.
I know you are. It's beautiful.
It's beautiful.
Such connection to nature. Back in the 20s and 30s, he came from a large family as well, put out on the fields at the age of 10 to go and clean up the rabbit infestation or farm or do chores on other people's farms and get paid or not get paid. But it was good. It kept the boys out of trouble, right? Because they were working with their hands. Young men have to do physical work because it's good for them. It's good for their mind. It's good for their body. But the incident that actually is very significant around him becoming the man that he was in boxing, which wasn't intentional, by the way, he just had a really long arm reach and was good at a punch, is that on the farm he was given a gun when he was a very young teenager to cull the kangaroos. And he killed this kangaroo. And when he went up to check its status, he realised that it was a mother kangaroo and had little Joey in her pouch. And he was devastated. And he picked up that Joey and he took it home and he was trying to feed it and keep it alive, but it didn't it died after a couple of days. So that's the reason why in his robe he has this purple kangaroo, and that's how he fought, because he wanted to, inside of him, he was devastated that he had done such harm to an animal. He hated doing it. He actually didn't like boxing at all, but it was something he was good at. It was something that had drawn him into, obviously, earning money, providing for a family. He was successful in what he did, but he didn't particularly like it because of the harm and violence that he imposed on other people. And I think that kind of moved back to that moment in time when he killed an animal for the sake of being told as a young boy, you have to cull this because they're killing the crops.
Yeah.
And, it did affect him. But he was very successful, pretty boy at boxing. And when he passed away, you can tell how much they talk about delayed concussion and concussion in big sports stars. And that was very evident when he passed away in his 80s.
Yeah, I'm a big boxing fan.
Yeah.
I've had some of the greats here of Australian boxing.
Yes.
I love it, and I think boxing's a great analogy of life. It's an analogy of success. You get knocked down, you get back up. You take shortcuts, you get hurt.
Absolutely.
You get back out what you want. Do you think he passed a lot of those traits onto you? Or genetically, maybe?
Genetically, definitely.
Yeah.
Look, I'm very much like my father. I do call myself my father's daughter.
And why is that?
Aesthetically, I look more like my dad than my mum. My fighting spirit is definitely, I don't suffer fools lightly.
Yeah.
I shoot from the hip.
Good.
I'm not someone that sees something and turns a blind eye.
Yeah.
Never.
Yeah.
And I remember that from being very young in primary school all the way through to now.
But tell me this, you talk about being bullied at school. What do you say to kids that are being bullied at school?
Oh, it's worse now.
Yeah, it's way worse. And social media is a platform for cowards.
But it's how we deal with it as well.
Yeah.
If in my time, I'm 50, so in my time when I was in primary school, if there was a fight, you get the cane.
Yeah.
You don't do it again.
No.
You want to fight? This is what you get. Now they get counselling, they get cotton wool. Because my daughter's just been mediation, and the parents are told this, and then the parents of the victim of the bully and the bully's parents, they're not allowed to talk to each other outside of school. Oh my God, if that happened to my daughter, I walk straight up to the other parent and say, listen, we need to talk. What's happening? But I had a very deep discussion with I've got principals and school teachers around my family and close to me. And one of the biggest issues is the privacy laws around children now. You can't ask their name, you can't speak their name in the meeting. So the difference between when I was bullied at school and my daughter has been bullied at school, as well as my nephew from one of my sisters, is the way we're handling it. I don't know. There was a documentary, I think it was on the ABC, called The Slap. And when that came out, there was a social disruption. So The Slap was about parents who have got, say, the kids are misbehaving, would grab their arm, give them a nice big smack on the bum. And then that just sent this wave. And all of a sudden, if we had any kind of like disciplinary acts against our children, then we were in trouble. So then that caused, I would say, instilled fear. And now we've got to put all of these mechanisms in place to try and curb children's behaviour at school. And then there's the expense for counselling and things like that come in. But to me, my fighting spirit was, I hit a few girls at school because they came up to me and said, oh, we saw you in the paper, you were doing some modelling or whatever. And I was like, that was normal to me, coming from a media family. And they said, you're nothing, you're this, and I was like, it just didn't bother me because other stuff was going on that was much bigger. Much
bigger. It's hard to out-trauma you in those sort of situations, isn't it?
That's a good saying. It's hard to be out-traumaed when you go through child sexual abuse. Yes, it is.
That's what when I was in prison officers' go-to is making you feel like a scumbag. And I used to think that that's all they do. I wouldn't even say they're professional haters. They're B-grade haters because their vocabulary's pretty poor, got a bad attitude and even worse breath. It's funny because I jump on social media, I get my share of haters. All these stiffs, law-abiding people that just think I should be in constant pain, I should be suffering, and I should be on my knees begging for forgiveness, and that's all over. I don't have to do that. But this need for people to make you want to feel bad,
hurt people.
And it is. It's projection.
Absolutely. And I know you speak a lot about trauma-informed counsellors, and this is really important because we need to look through the lens of, all right, if you're being bullied by people, whether it be digitally or face-to-face or in the past in the jail, these people are peer pressured into that space, or they're hurt themselves, and they're in the they have a golden opportunity to outwork that hate onto another person. They do it. Because I think that the human body, the vessel that we have, this amazing opportunity we have to be humble. What
spins me out, Louise, is this. I've got this filter, right? And I go, that might be bullying. I want to have an opinion sometimes, but I always go, I'm not a hater. I'll sometimes want to ask a question, and I'll question myself first. I don't want to inflict any sort of hate on any people. But the beauty about TikTok is you can respond with a video message. And I go, I know, mate, it's all right. I know you don't think I'm a dickhead. I think you're just looking in the mirror and you see a dickhead, and maybe you're not. I said, but do you ever see him in the street? Don't duck and hide or anything. Come up. I promise I'll give you a hug. I won't give you black eyes.
Yes.
That's the second prize. But I'll give you a hug.
But you are someone, you fascinate me, and I'm so happy that you're walking in this time on this earth, because you've come from hell, and you've gone through the process to understand what's happened to you, and that it's not your fault what's happened to you.
Yeah.
So now you've got this life, and I'm the same in a way. You've got this life that you can place understanding. You have a profound level of understanding because of the revelation that you've been through, knowing that what's happened to you is not your fault.
That's a big thing. But even those kids that are, I know we're getting on, but even those kids that are bullied, they question, what am I, or what have I done for this to be happening to me?
Of course, that's the first thing that a child will do. Why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to me? With abuse, with everything, because they're innocent. They don't know this world of violence and anger. A lot of kids who are witness trauma, who experience witness trauma, have never gone through anything like you and I have. But the sheer fact that they're seeing violence that is 2 feet away from them is affecting them on a cellular level. Yeah. And that's another form of trauma, like Catherine Barton, who's one of our most esteemed artists, wrote a movie called Blaze.
I've seen the shorts of that. It looks amazing.
It's incredible. But that's from witness trauma.
And you know what? In the work I do with the abuse thing, sometimes them people are like, I'm not saying there's a gauge of trauma, but sometimes what happens to them people from witness trauma, like in the boys' homes, the guys that never got sexually abused but seen it going on, are just as in bad ways of the people who it happened to.
Yes. Look, one of my family members was abused by a neighbour, and that neighbour, who was a gardener, had the female family member was being sexually abused, and the boy family member was made to stand in the corner and watch. And this is what perpetrators do. They're master manipulators. They know the fear of what's happening will silence the children. They get threatened, as Andrew mentioned. I'll kill your cat. If you say this, you'll go to jail. Your father will belt you because you've done this. And then these children literally are gagged because they're innocent. They've never seen anything of this calibre before. I say, one of the things I often say, and it's something I thought about when I first started doing the work I do, a perpetrator's greatest weapon is victim silence and shame. 100%.
And I think that's the whole purpose of what we do, what you do, and Andrew Carpenter and the people at FACA and Grace and Lula, and the big team of people that we're building together, Gary Jublin, Madeline West, just to name a few. Anyone I left out, I promise you.
You can include me.
Yeah, that's who I'm saying. You're part of the team. Yeah. Is we're working hard to take away that shame and create a platform for people to tell their stories and disempower the pedophiles. But one of our greatest enemies to what we do is the government bodies.
Of course.
They are the protectors of these things. And you know what? I don't care what people say about George Pell. Okay, I just say it on this and it stops them in the track. You say George Pell is not guilty. Okay. Google the Melbourne response. The Melbourne response is a blueprint for how to cover up for pedophiles, how to pay off victims, and how to move the priest and that around. He is guilty of sin. So what was terrifying for a lot of survivors, I know a lot of survivors seeing Tony Abbott visiting him in jail, seeing John, and then seeing two former prime ministers and a current opposition leader attend his funeral.
Yeah.
I was with the protesters and out there, and it was just sick. And what was sickening was the amount of well-to-do looking people that attended that funeral that day.
This is what Grace said on our panel, is the most perpetrator in terms of like socioeconomic and demographic, etc., is those high net wealth men who aren't necessarily single. They could have a family, but they're the ones with the money. They're in their 40s and 50s, and they're the ones who are in high places. We have this saying, evil abounds in high places.
Yeah.
And a lot of people go, no, when you get successful and wealthy, you get more mature and you understand and you get wisdom when you get older. No, you don't.
You can afford Brett Walker QC, the best QC in the land.
That's right, exactly. And 100%. The more power, the more money you have, and also power. There's an incredible book by a journalist. Caucho is her surname. She was a Mexican journalist. And she worked in the space of predators in Mexico. And she went undercover. Lydia Caucho, incredible woman. She went undercover and went into the pedophile rings. She went into different areas of police stations. She dressed as a nun. She went in as a prostitute, as a pole dancer. And she spent time with in these spaces, these environments. She wanted to understand why child sex trafficking was on the rise. And it came down to, I'm like doing a bit of a spoiler here, but when she was sitting in front of one of the kingpins in terms of child trafficking, he said it's all about control. And if you look at the positions back to Australia, and you've got to read this book, I've got to get the title to you, it doesn't come to mind at the moment, but when it comes back to what's happening here in Australia, because we are the third largest demanders of live streaming child sex abuse out of the Philippines.
Yeah, I was going to say
we're the third largest, UK, US and us, which is utterly disgraceful. When you think of the demand, it's always the people, they're cashed up, they really are, and then they can hide their digital footprint, their fingerprint, and obviously go into Chan 4, Chan 8, dark web, and then they access this stuff. And I think we were talking on the panel in how do we stop that? You follow the money trail. You cut off the supply through the money. There's got to be more laws with private banks to be able to do that. But I promise you, you'll find that a lot of it's no disrespect, I know bankers in my circle of friends, but it's in there. The demand is in there.
On the banking subject, I'll tell you the powers that the banks have got. I've had bank shut my account.
Yes,
I've had St George, Westpac, Commonwealth and National Australia because I'm a persona non grata. They don't want nothing to do with me because I'm a convicted bank robber or convicted criminal. This is happening so much, but it doesn't happen to the pedophiles, convicted pedophiles.
No, it doesn't.
And this normalisation, I was thinking about it on the way here, how slowly they're normalising pedophilia, and it's this slow push. Initially, they had the pedophiles were the worst of the worst, the killers and everything. And then they brought out bikies. They went, here we go, here's a diversion.
It's a distraction.
That's the biggest distraction I've ever seen. So they've got all these laws applied to bikies. They try to tell us bikies pose a bigger risk than pedophiles. They target all these resources in them. They've got all these different laws, but the same laws don't apply to pedophiles.
No.
Isn't it crazy?
No, Lula Demble, who's an extraordinary advocate.
Amazing. She's amazing.
Hey, Lula. Hey, Lula. We love you, Lula. She was talking because they can easily, it's about their property, it's about their assets. And then here you have no value placed on human life when it comes to child sex trafficking. Somebody who worked in the United Nations, because I talk about this all the time. Every single day I'm bringing up some topic around how can we solve this problem, whether it be small or in the higher planes. And she said to me, child sex trafficking so massive is because if you look at the asset of something, let's say this mobile phone, I buy it, it has one user, this is a 7 Plus, I'm so behind, but I love that. But that'll only go to one user. You can share a child 10, 20 times a day. And that's why they're so valuable to the pimp, to the perpetrators, to the pedophiles, but not to the child because they're seen as a thing. They're given no name, no identification, no nothing.
When I was in the boys' homes, I used to see these kids and I used to call them crackers, and what a cracker was a male prostitute. And I used to see just how isolated and how broken they were. I didn't realise it at the time, but with the benefit of hindsight, I look back on these kids, and it was quite evident back then there was something not right with these kids. They're just how broken out, how numb they were. They were way advanced as far as drug use, using heroin at the age of 13.
Yeah.
And serious heroin problems. They'd be coming in at 13, watching a 13-year-old kid withdraw from heroin like a serious heroin.
That's horrible.
And that's where these things go. So what happens is the kid gets sexually abused, ends up on drugs, starts committing crime, and then the finger's pointed at them.
Yeah.
You're the bad guy.
Yeah.
And I think Joey Williams talks about a book by Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey, and the question is, what happened to you?
Yeah.
The question is never asked of what happened to you. It was never asked to me. First time it ever happened to me was when I spoke to the Royal Commission Institution Responses to Child Sexual Abuse, who the greatest Prime Minister the country's ever seen, Julia Gillard, had the balls to introduce. And I'll argue it all day of the week. Like every good Prime Minister leaves a legacy, and that was hers. She allowed so many survivors to begin the healing process. Well, she's a hero, so big shout out to Julia Gillard. I'd love to meet you one day. This whole thing with yourself, did anyone ever say to you, what happened to you?
No, not at all. I guess the most interesting part of the story that I think I need to share for people who want to hear about what happens to children who are suffering through child sex abuse is they think that they're the only ones that this horror is happening to them. Yeah. So from the age of 4 to the age of 9, I was being sexually abused by an adult. I was suffering from migraines. Because I was a twin, what was happening if my mother needed to go out and do shopping, it was always more difficult to take 2 children instead of 1, so she would leave me in my grandparents' house because I would...
And who was the perpetrator of your grandfather?
My grandfather on my mother's side. Yeah. Because my grandfather on my father's side was the good grandfather who I loved. So the grandfather on my mother's side would abuse me any opportunity, whether it be at the kitchen table, in the lounge room, watching television, would take me into his bedroom because my grandmother and my grandfather slept separately. She was a very overweight woman, and the interesting thing was he was put into this side room. And this room itself had a door that you couldn't see through. It had a window that you could look into the door, but you couldn't see around to where the bed was that he would be abusing me on. Every time it happened, I'd be praying someone look through that little window that's in that door, and no one came in. And they're very opportunist, so if there's people saying farewell or if something's happening out in another part of the house, that's when they steal the children away. And I ended up, at the age of 9, he started abusing me and threatening my dancing. And I rose up and I looked at him when I was in a locked bedroom and said, "You can't do this to me anymore." I knew at that point that no one was coming to save me. There was no adult that had the inkling, or maybe they did, because I think Andrew Carpenter said, when a child is happy with coming into a family union or whatever and all of a sudden is avoiding a particular adult,
that's a sign.
That's a massive sign that something has gone wrong.
Do you think today people are getting better at spotting these sorts of things, or they just...
This is the ugliest, most disgraceful disease on the human race.
100%.
The evil crime against innocent children. A lot of people do not want to even look or
people
listen.
Don't want to talk about it.
People still don't realise that child sex trafficking is the second largest industry in the world. Can't fathom it.
And what a lot of people put it down, it's part of that's conspiracy theory rhetoric, and it's real.
It is real. Until Sound of Freedom was this incredible movie that came out only recently, and it showed a CIA agent who basically would work in identifying perpetrators. He then removed himself from the US government and went out on his own to create a unit where they would go in and rescue kids from these horrendous... And there's a lot of controversy around that at the moment, if you know of the film. However, what they're emulating, what they're showing in this film is happening every single day.
Yeah.
If you look at the amount, and 2 universities have only just done a study on the amount of children being live streamed out of the Philippines, which is our closest neighbour, and we're the 3rd highest in demand of that content, Australia, 500,000 live streams a day. 500,000 live streams a day. If you quantify that, you're looking at how many kids are in danger, and it's just completely horrendous. We've got to heal our own backyard.
Yeah.
Australia is.
Oh, we're in it.
We're in a critical way when it comes to
And
harming our children.
them stats aren't even per capita. They're just outright stats, aren't they?
They're just outright stats.
So to say we're the 3rd biggest abusers of children in the world, that's just not even per capita. That is insane.
Yeah, it is insane.
And I look at places in Australia, there's certain places, I'll tell you what, perpetrators' paradise is definitely Queensland, Australia.
Yes, it is.
And has been for a long time. And I can tell you, I've done jail up there. If you look at a pedophile the wrong way in jail, they will jump all over you. They have their own jails. And I say this, and I'm not going to stop until Walston Prison in Queensland gets disbanded. You've got 900 prisoners associating on a daily basis, pedophiles, and they're all talking shop. That's dangerous.
Yeah, it is dangerous. Do they still have? I don't know what you're allowed or not allowed in jail. Do they still have one of these?
No, you're not allowed a phone.
No phone. What do they have? Because you know how
you got a phone which has got 6 phone numbers on it that you can ring people. But what they do is they share how to get away with things in certain places and that. Bank robbers do, drug smugglers do, people who steal cars, and they're the same. And they're not monitored.
Yeah. Not monitored, and their sentences are light.
Oh, 100%.
And this is one of the biggest problems that my jaw drops every time that you hear that a pedophile has had 6 months. My pedophile, so when I was 9, I stood up and I said, "You can't do this to me anymore," and I walked out. And then I thought I was free. And then at 14, 15, I was sitting back in that home because my mother kept taking me back to the grandparents' home. And I, being a child and also harbouring this horrendous secret that had happened to me, I just, out of obligation, would go to the home. But if I could say, no, I want to go here or whatever, I'd go to a friend's place, I'd make that up. But if I couldn't find any other place to escape to, I had to go back to the grandparents' home. But when I was 15, I remember sitting at the piano and I was playing it, and my other sisters were in the room. So I had 2 brothers and 2 sisters. And I remember one of my sisters coming out of the kitchen saying, "Granddad's just touched my genitals." That's an adult way of saying what she said. And my other sister, who was sitting on the floor, her back snapped up. And I went, "Oh my God, it's happened to her too." So I was now 4 years on from me saying, "You can't do this to me," at 9. Saved myself, realised that my 2 younger sisters were also. So that afternoon, I went straight to my auntie's house because I knew I had tried to tell my mother what had happened. She dismissed me. I had told a friend, and then that mother had spoken to my mother and nothing happened to her. This is a code of silence that people need to be very aware of.
The family name's more important than...
Exactly, more important than the children. So I ended up going to my father's sister, and she was a good woman. And I sat down and I told my cousin and I told her, and she ended up saying, "I'm calling the police." So she put everything in action, and I couldn't be more thankful for that. So that afternoon, this is how fast they worked. The perpetrator was picked up by 3 officers, a female and 2 male officers.
Can I just ask one question there? Yeah. In that sort of thing, a female abuse survivor should always be talked to by a female officer.
That's
I
right.
think it'd be so intimidating.
Yes.
To be talking to men.
Children were on the side. The officers going and picking up the perpetrator, there were 3 of them. And I actually have the documents that showcase exactly what happened. It's a 46-page document. My grandmother then had a stroke and she was rushed to hospital. He was held in a cell. The interviewing officer obviously wrote all the documentation down. But then the children, myself, my 2 younger sisters, we were taken to Burleigh Heads Police Station and we had to make a statement. My 2 younger sisters...
How was that for you? Tell me.
I could speak very clearly as a 14, 15-year-old, saying this is what happened. Yes, I was asked questions. Kids just don't offer up information. They have to be asked questions really well to get the information. But my 2 younger sisters could not articulate it, so they had to demonstrate through dolls exactly what was going on. So the dolls had genitalia, and then one of my sisters presented that she was being penetrated. So then one of the officers moved so fast out of that police station to go down to the perpetrator's house and pick him up and put him in a cell. And then the court case is another story. And this is where we have such shame when it comes to the law system around protecting children of child sex abuse.
What do you say? Often when a pedophile's charged, they have what's called a media suppression order. So you're not allowed... this would be a good question because they have a media suppression order where they can't release the name of the pedophile to protect the witness. What do you say to that?
To me, it's BS, because it should actually be on the onus of the victim whether or not they want this to go out into the public space.
Yeah.
But even over the last 5 years, 6 years or so, I've done a number of stories across big publications, whether it be workplace harassment, child sex abuse, assault, domestic violence, because I've got the trifecta. I've got child sex abuse, assault and domestic violence in my history. And every time that I've said, you can put my name down, they go, okay, no, we can't. I say, why can't you? Speaking to an esteemed journalist, why can't you? There's 2 reasons. Again, it just comes back making the victim feel that they're not heard and not valued with their story. I'm always asked, has it gone to court? Is the perpetrator still alive? Laws, as you say, stop me from naming my perpetrator, but because my perpetrator is dead, I can now name myself. So there's all these laws, but a big part of it is the papers don't want to be sued for stating the wrong thing.
Yeah.
If there's black and white print saying the opposite, in contrary of the story.
Yeah.
If someone wants to be nasty, they could go after the paper. So this is where I just think, I think with the panel that we did at South by Southwest, we were saying what everyone was thinking, but we're unafraid to say it. And we need more people with that level of bravery.
We're so badly sanitised these days with what we can say and what we can't say. I don't care. I say, sue me. I say, just sue me. If you want what I've got, come and try taking it. I'm going to fight you, but I'm always going to tell the truth.
Yeah, you have to.
Because the truth has become a crime.
Yeah, it has.
I know it's total off topic, but look at Julian Assange, what they've done to him.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, it is crazy.
And that's that whole thing, the Epstein thing, you think at Ignite talks that just get shut down. You know, really want to... Why can't we see these lists on the Epstein? Why? What's the problem?
It's like the sex offenders list that we have here in Australia. It's not allowed to go public. And I think the reason why Darren Hinch tried to get that public, he did years and years of trying to get it into the media and break the laws around it. I just feel that if I look at it from my logical lens, it's because they don't want vigilantes going out and finding these people and where they live and knocking them off.
But you don't want pedophiles abusing your children.
No, and you don't want them released from jail and living in a stay house or whatever it's called, and it's like on the same street as a public school, which is where they put them. I have one basically on a corner, one street away from my daughter's school, and 3 o'clock every afternoon, 2 men walk out, and you know that they have a history of preying on children because of the way that they look at the schoolgirls when they walk past. You can see it because we are the holders of the truth. We have the knowledge of being to hell and back, and we've seen the mannerisms and the way that these people have a certain look and feel and energy about them. You can see one a mile away.
How do you feel when you turn on the TV and you see a pedophile go into court and get one of these really light little sentences and you don't pose a risk of reoffending? It was vanilla.
It's shameful. We know that these people, I don't know the latest statistics in rehabilitation, but they're very small, if anything.
I'll tell you something. I just want to know this. A heterosexual is attracted to a female. A lesbian's attracted to a female. A heterosexual man's obviously attracted to a female. Heterosexual woman's attracted to a man. How do we change someone's sexual preference?
I don't think you can.
I don't think you can either.
I think it's innate. I'm a heterosexual woman. I'm attracted to men.
Yeah.
End of story. And I probably have every reason to be a lesbian because I've had men harm me my entire life. So do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So this kind of solidifies what you have just said. I should go, I don't want to have anything to do with men because men have harmed me in the most horrendous way, in a sexual, emotional and physical way. If I want to share love with someone, I'm going to go towards the softness of the feminine divinity. But that's not my innate nature.
Yeah.
I'm still connected to desiring heterosexual men. I'm married.
Yeah.
What you just said has profound truth to it. Men predominantly, because we know 97% of perpetrators of sexual violence are male, are attracted to children. Now, a very interesting thing about my case is the interviewing officer, because I got hold of my court documents. I was not allowed to access my own court documents for 2 decades, and I finally got access to them. Can I ask you,
what was the purpose of that?
I needed to know the truth of what happened.
But how come they wouldn't allow you access to it?
They allow it to the next of kin. The next of kin was my grandmother. And when she died, the next of kin was my mother. And then my mother's still alive, therefore I can't access them. Just by the grace of the universe, by God, I actually called up the magistrate and I said, I want to access a court doc because I had the magistrate's single page of so-and-so versus so-and-so when this was the outcome. And it was like not even the amount of alphabet numerals that were on the actual paper. It was so minimal, I couldn't believe it. I'm thinking, this person has harmed 3. We've got another 7 female cousins that come in and out of the house all the time.
Yeah, he's done more.
He's done more. And then we've got neighbours running in and out of this house all the time. You know that he's done more. With the magistrate document, there was hardly anything on it. So when I was 6.5 months pregnant with my daughter, I refused to pass on the generational curse. I knew if I had not got all the truth in front of me and I figured it out in my head and my heart, I would pass that on to the child that was in my belly. So I went to the magistrate. They sent me to the Central Court District. I'm trying to find these documents. I finally go to Burleigh Heads Police Station. They said, we've sent them out to West Burleigh Police Station because Burleigh Head's closing down. And after 26 years, you cannot access your court documents. They destroy them. And I was 25 years and 6 months.
Wow.
And I got these court documents. And I remember sitting there, I prepared myself and I read them all. And at the end, I just laughed. I laughed because I could not believe what was coming out in the interviewing document between the police officer and the perpetrator. This perpetrator of mine believed that he was loving his grandchildren, and he also believed, when he was asked, look, you have a wife, you've had children yourself. This is a very clever interviewing officer in the police station at Burleigh Heads. He was saying, you have a wife, and he goes, I haven't had sex for 25 years. So I look at that because there is this myth around men who are perpetrators who don't have sex for a long time and then they start preying on younger children.
Very common in priesthood.
Very common. So abstaining in the priesthood is a very bad thing. It's a very bad thing. But also when it comes to these situations, in my case, I think I heard Andrew say this is a common thing when he's interviewing these people. I've just had a divorce and I needed to rape a 12-year-old.
Go to a brothel.
And it's exactly, go to a brothel, exercise, go to the gym, redirect your energy. But it comes back to what you're saying. These men have this innate desire, uncontrollable desire to have sex with children.
I seen a book. I was in jail in Rockhampton and they had the textbook for the sex offenders course. And there was the title of the book was Me and My Deviant Behaviour. You know how many pages it had in it? 12.
Oh, my gosh.
That was the text for their sex offenders course.
My goodness.
Crazy, you'd think.
Yeah.
What do we do? Do we castrate these guys, or what is?
I'd love to.
Yeah,
I know.
No anaesthetic.
No.
Give them ear.
I shouldn't laugh about that, but I've often wondered, and speaking to other victims of abuse, which they're all different ages.
And they're getting younger.
And it makes
Do you
you
think that's
wonder.
because of the exposure to porn?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. I will tell you now, today, this very day, at 10 o'clock when we started this podcast, that one of my family members in Queensland is in the Beenleigh courts being sentenced for being a pedophile, and he's 20.
Yeah.
The generational curse, which I'm talking about, that I needed to break.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's this image that we think that pedophiles are
old the comb over, thick glasses,
exactly,
hunchback.
Or wearing the Bond singlet and a pair of stubbies, or it's not that at all.
No.
At all. We can just throw that stereotype out the window.
Come in all shapes and sizes.
All shapes and sizes. And the sad reality is this kid has not gone through the pain that I did, but he was more than likely watching a whole lot of porn. And let me tell you, porn...
And it desensitises them.
No, it stirs up their desire to outwork it in the physical realm, not just watching it on a screen.
Yeah.
And so the more they watch it and the more desire they have to connect it into it, it's addictive, and it's made that way. And they're saying now that 70% of those watching it want to see something that's violent, that involves strangling, that involves pain, and they're wanting to see it done on younger and younger victims in that scene. So if you have young kids, and they're saying as young as 10 in Australia, are being subjected to pornography, then you are basically bringing up a new world of young boys who don't have the frontal cortex, like they're not developed, their neurological pathways are not developed, but they're being hijacked to desire that. So when that happens, then there's a whole shift in brain chemistry. So it's a very evil tactic. And it comes to this as well. This is a story I did. Kids Easy Prey for my sickos on RudeTube. I did this story, and I'll tell you why we need major reform in various areas, even in media. Not only what Andrew's doing in law and policy with Lula, with ICOS, which is her, which she co-founded, and also all the campaigns that are being done, for example, by Harrison James and Grace Tame, and even Chanel Contos, is Elsagate. And Elsagate is not necessarily known, but it's a grooming product. So what it is PG-rated or P-rated content on YouTube, like My Little Pony or some kind of Disney thing or something really innocent, that freelancers get hold of in replicating through animation, but they put very adult themes on it. For example, my daughter at the age of 4 was watching My Little Pony. And then that was the original My Little Pony that's created by Hasbro, and it's been running for 50 years plus. And then the auto roll on YouTube was on, and then it went on to a 2D 1-minute skit. And the skit was of a male My Little Pony character that was masturbating under the sheets, and then another female pony walked in on him masturbating under the sheets, and then she says, "Oh," and he goes, "Oh, don't worry, we'll keep it a secret, I'll give you a cookie." So that was the theme of what this Elsagate video of My Little Pony was. So my daughter screamed and ran away from the screen. I ended up going back and looking at the history. I watched the video, I reported the video, I emailed YouTube Australia, I then emailed YouTube in America, and it's so hard to get hold of anyone in these big social media platforms. I then called the eSafety Commissioner. I emailed her the details. I called the police. They directed me to the eSafety Commissioner. I got nothing from her. I then went to Hasbro in America, Hasbro in Australia, I was doing everything to shut this channel down because it had 2 million followers. Yeah. And that video had been seen 1.2 million times. What's the gravity of this? The gravity is that kids are experiencing witness trauma the fact that my daughter screamed and ran away. She saw something. She heard the groaning. She saw something that did not sit with her innocent self, and it was foreign, and it scared her. So she ran away. Elsa Gate covers terrorism, sexual abuse, rape, pain, through dentistry, through things that kids like, and it puts them in a state of fear and anxiety. And when they're like that, children tend to don't associate. They want to go to their room, they want to be calm by themselves. Then if they've got a digital device, guess who's infiltrating that? The porn industry. So I ended up having to go to the media. I went to this amazing journalist, what's her name here? Adela Biani, and she said, let's do a story and I'll send it to Hasbro. And you know what? That channel got shut down so fast because of copyright issues. Not because 2 million children are being harmed by being groomed through Elsagate, but because of copyright. And I think this is an area, for example, I know I heard Andrew, sorry, I'm just going on because I've been listening to your podcast because I love it. But Andrew Carpenter, the solicitor in Adelaide, he was saying it's so hard, even with the sentencing, because what we're sentencing these pedophiles on is a policy and a law that hasn't really taken form yet, which is grooming. We've got coercive control coming into play. We now have in Queensland, anyone who's a perpetrator.
The one that troubles me the most is possession of images. That's accessory after the fact.
100%. And I've heard you say that. Yes, it is. But guess what? Do you have a release form for that 14-year-old that you've raped on camera? No? Guess what? You can be sued for that. In media, if I have a team of people come in to shoot a TV show, every single person has to sign a release form.
Yeah, I've done a lot of them.
Yeah. So if this perpetrator has all these images and videos of these children or these people that they're sharing on, do you have a release form for that kid? No. Get them on copyright. Why don't we start?
Yeah, that's a good way. That might be a good avenue into actually suing them.
It could be, because there's a very solid and very concrete law around copyright when you've got somebody on camera. And these kids' faces are on camera.
That's a really good thing.
Andrew Carpenter, where are you?
Yeah.
Andrew, let's talk.
And Gary Jublin's he is big on where people are aware of abuse happening and they fail to report it.
Yeah. Yes.
And the legislation's got to change in that. In New South Wales in particular, they have what's called the Crime Commission. The Crime Commission's got coercive powers. So they can march someone in and say, there might be someone who's accused of importing drugs or has no knowledge of. So they can come in and say, look, we know that you know that this is happening. And if they say, no, I don't, they say, we've got the intel that you have and you're telling us lies, they can jail them straight up. No magistrate, send them off to... I wonder why. So they get someone who's got all these images. They drag them into they never use the Crime Commission on pedophiles. Crime Commission's got two avenues. It's got unexplained wealth and knowledge of crime. And they never use them so they could drag them in and find out why this pedophile's got a couple of $1 million home. Where did it come from? They don't ever, they use bikies, in particular bikies, their favourite people, for some reason. I'm not pro, when I say this, I'm not pro any. I just think bikies are a really good gauge against pedophiles. You can say, you have all these laws applied to these and this task force and... Here's an interesting thing. In Queensland, they got the bikie task force is called Task Force Maximus, 123 coppers. Task Force Argos, 15.
Oh, and Argos, kudos to Argos.
Yeah.
Their incredible Project Argos team is just profound. I agree with you. Look, in America, they've got Bikers Against Child Abuse, which is a team of upstanding citizens who love the lifestyle of being a bikie.
Yep.
And what they do is when there's ever a court case that has a child that is going in on the witness stand, they pick them up. I think in WA they have established this as well.
Same with FACA. FACA did the same.
I love Adam and what he does. And it's the same with Mel Thomas with the K-Up project. She's teaching young girls how to do a form of karate to help them with confidence and protecting themselves. Yeah, but Bikers Against Child Abuse in America do that. And they pick up, the child goes onto one of the bikes and they take that child to court. They sit in the courtroom because they are establishing a presence of protecting the child while that child is on the stand and having to regurgitate the pain that he or she has been through. I'm glad that these citizens are upstanding and trying to counterattack, counterpunch the BS that people have to deal with when it's so evident that a child has been harmed. Physical evidence of children being harmed should be reported by a doctor and immediately going through a child abuse court. We actually have got so many cases that don't get there. We should have our own court for child abuse.
What pedophiles are really good at is pointing the finger at everyone else. Yeah. I'm not as bad as that. Most of them don't think they're criminals. Most of them don't think they've done, and they're extremely manipulative. In the prison system, they end up with the best jobs. And I've sat back and watched pedophiles groom prison officers.
Wow.
Groom them.
Yep.
Into thinking they're not that bad. And it's, sir, do you need a cup of coffee? And they make them a cup of coffee and, I was just going to cook us a bit of lunch. He's cooking a bit. The next minute they're sitting in the office eating together, and that prison officer has forgotten the damage or what this person is in. And if you say something to that pedophile, you filthy dog, or spit on him or punch him or anything like that, that officer will take umbrage to it. Yeah. And you're just sitting back and saying, you've just been groomed.
Yeah, 100%. And do you know what it is? It's because and it comes back to your initial discussion right at the top of this podcast, which is placing value and worth on people. We're actually really crap at doing that. And what happens is even the young woman, Brittany, who was on our panel through video feed, who was lured into the adult film industry in LA because there was no life-giving words given to her in her home. We need that. We need to speak and compliment another person. So for me, with what you're doing, yes, you've done the crime, you've done the time, but what happened to you? When you understand what happened to you when you were younger and that you were outworking it in the only way that you knew how as a victim, especially at the boys' home that you were at, which was just devastating, that things should be burnt down, is that you get to understand your story and the why. When you understand that, you can have this empathy, and humans are built for empathy and relationship, yet we're being suffocated. That's being pulled out of us.
But I'll tell you something now. With my own abuse, I lost a lot of empathy and compassion because none was displayed to me. And I was like, and then people would say, like, I'd go to get sentenced on bank robberies and they'd say, how do you feel about the victims? I'd say, I don't feel anything. Because I had no feelings at all. Because I was that badly desensitised and disenfranchised, and I had no connection to anything other than I was just numb. Yeah. And I had nothing. But from my own journey, where I got all that back from was when I started trauma counselling, when I got to understand, one, it wasn't my fault. And I slowly but surely learned about compassion and empathy. They try to push this thing on you for forgiveness. That's a tough one. You've
got to forgive yourself.
But the whole thing with it is resentments. That's the resentment is the kicker. That's the resentments are like drinking a cup of poison and hoping the other person dies for it. So having no worth on like that hatred and everything like that was not self-serving. I don't have that these days. I don't have nothing towards them people. I don't have nothing other than that's what happened. And if I ever seen you, I'd mostly wouldn't be good for you, still at this age and this date. I'll tell you a funny thing. One of my trauma counsellors, when I got trauma counselling through the Royal Commission, she came up with a plan. She was an amazing one. And she said, Russell, I never seen her. I met her. I'd done trauma counselling. To this day, I don't even know what she looked like, but I'd done it for 4 years. And she goes, today, Russell, we're going to kill a pedophile. Let's make a plan. And I said, there with bells on. She goes, so where, do you know where's one? I said, I'd have to jump over a couple of fences and I'll be able to get in this unit. And she goes, all right. How many blokes in that unit? And I said, 60. She goes, how many do you reckon I'll tell you? I said, 59, because one will be dead. And she said, oh, so we're close. And it was just a statistic breakdown. And then it got back to, you've killed this pedophile, you're going to court. How long are you going to get in jail? I said, mandatory 20 years in Queensland. And she goes, what is that going to do to your children? And then what is that going to do to you? So that thought, that comforting thought that I had for many years, I had to get rid of it because it wasn't serving me. I had too much invested in that thought as whether it be an escapism or just something that was like a pillow for me.
Yeah, yeah.
And I had to get rid of it. And that was the beginning of my healing journey, I reckon.
That's incredible. I had a similar counselling session, but in my imagination I actually did kill my pedophile. And it was called red essence work because I did a lot of talk therapy for 15 years and I still had this pattern and this bulk, this pain. And I was suggested to go to this gentleman called Mark Caleb, and he does red essence work. It's a little bit of hypnotherapy, I believe. And I ended up, after 10 sessions, he took me through, because he'd always say, when you think about this, where is the pain sitting in your body?
Yeah.
And there'd always be tears and anger and shanking and whatever. Trauma sits on a cellular level. And he walked me through. He got me into a state. He goes, I want you to go right back to where it happened. And he must have known I was ready to do this because that's a scary place to go. And I ended up going all the way back to the house to the point where he got me to visualise the carpet, the skirting on the floor. And I could see this is quite way out there, but this is what released me. It broke the chains off me of this issue because I wanted to kill that person as well. So he walked me through this whole process where he said, okay, you're in the house now. I want you to grow your spirit, your body bigger than the house. And I'm like, I trust this man. I'm going to do it. So in my mind, I did that. He said, go and find your pedophile. I found him in the bedroom, exactly where my mind had left him. Grab him by the throat, walk down to the ocean and drown him. Part of me was going, I can't believe this man is asking me to do this. But a part of me was absolutely ready to do it. And after I did that, I went back, he goes, go back to the house and burn it, light it up. And I came out of that and I asked him, why did you do that? He said, you've just rewritten your history. You just took back your power. You just got to a point where you had redesigned that. And it was like a domino effect where everything else just went perfect alignment. And I got out of that session and I was a different woman. And I had some kind of power to do the work that I do now, to see the horrors that I see in researching what I do, and to have this fighting spirit, this almost like warrior-esque spirit, which I know you connect with, to go, none of this is going to trigger me because I'm now fighting to stop this evil that is still harming innocent children.
And that self-destructive pattern that we're left with.
Yes.
I was a bad self-destructor. I want to talk about the work you do now. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So briefly, what I do, I call myself a PR, media, creative director during the day and then a vigilante at night. But what I found is this, in brief, is that I work in the men's lifestyle publishing space. And for 14 years, I speak to C-suite, I style them, I get them into a position of rebranding, giving them publicity through whether it be television or interviews or whatever. And with the gentlemen that I style, like I do a full safari style suite, they'd always come back to me and say, this was such a great experience, I wish I knew this when I was 18. And so I'd go, there's something there, because if we can place value and worth on our young boys, then we're going to see a different society. We're going to see protectors. We're going to see their warrior heart, their heart of like kings, young men, rise up and want to protect the people that they love around them and have a moral and ethical code. And if you think of this, in Japanese society, they have a samurai code. They have ikigai, which is a way of living. They have a very strong samurai code, which has got 8 very strong pillars. We have nothing here in Australia. We have no initiation from boys to men.
But it is hard to be a man in this day and age because of these... the expectation of men from all different facets of life is getting pushed and pulled. You're meant to be this, you're meant to be that, you're meant to be that. And it can be quite confusing of what you're meant to be. I'll give you an example. There's a guy called Spanian. I've been on his podcast a bit.
Yes.
And he's polarising. But people try to silence him.
You shouldn't silence. I agree with you. in society, if you ruin the man, if you ruin the masculine, nothing else can sit under him, under his energy and his presence well. Look, this is what we're talking about. We have damaged men, 97% of perpetrators. What's happening to the rest of the society? I know because a lot of girls, if you do martial arts as a girl, it's very rare that a woman can get to a black belt with 7 Dan stripes and be able to fight off a male perpetrator if she's ever attacked. Let me tell you that now. I grew up with a twin brother. We were equal in strength. The moment testosterone went through his body as a young teenager, he could pin me, because we'd fight. He'd pin me down. There's no way that I'm going to be able to fight against a man. So if you ruin the man, and if you create like evil or pull out his bravery, take away his courage, take away his worth and his purpose, then you've got toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
And this is what we're dealing with. Masculinity isn't toxic, it's just absent. True masculinity is absent because they're not being taught as young boys. To me,
That's why I say about domestic violence, not enough men get involved. If I've got a friend who's been punched up by a husband, I'm telling you, I'm knocking on his door.
Yeah.
And I'm giving him an offer that he can't refuse. The coppers mightn't get him.
Yeah.
But I'll sneako him somewhere and I'll fucking let him have it.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a story. One time when I was a kid, I was 17 years old, working, and I was coming home and I was working as an apprentice chef and I had a box of knives on me. I went to a cab rank and there's this bloke who had a girl by the hair uppercutting her, and 3 men stood there and done nothing.
Yeah.
And I went, bang, cracked him. I said, mate, you better stop. And he just laughed at me. And I hit him a few times, but he hit the ground, blood came out of his eye, obviously fractured his skull. And I thought I'd killed this bloke, and I thought and the coppers turned up. And if it wasn't for a woman, and this cop was a different cop, I just struck gold with this cop that day. And he looked at him and he looked at me and he goes, you did the man's work.
Yeah.
And he said, you've done the man's work. And he goes, for that. And he goes, and I didn't see you.
Yeah.
He said, get going. But he said, what do you got in that box? I said, knives. He said, you could have stabbed him. I said, I could have. I said, but I just want this woman. And this woman was not in a good way. But too many men these days, they're too scared to not get involved. There's a lot of men that can stop domestic violence.
Yes.
There's a lot of men that can say to that bloke, I'm bigger and tougher than you.
Yeah.
But they're because the punishment, what they'll get for stepping in, is worse than the perpetrator will get from actually doing it.
It's always, and there's a fear with that. Look, if women could solve this problem, we would have done so by now. We need our men to stand up in solidarity. We need them to stand beside us. And we spoke about this on the panel at South by Southwest. We need them to stand up and be brave because it's only another man that can really stop another man, unless a woman has to use something. She can only use her voice in these instances, and this is the truth.
I think you're so right. I think men themselves, like real good men with balls.
Yeah,
men need to get their balls back and say, hey, mate, because it's so many people don't want to get involved. They don't want to get involved that they know the kid's being abused. They know the woman's being bashed.
Yeah.
They know the bloke down the road selling ice to fucking kids. They don't want to get involved.
Yeah. There is a scientific reason for this. There's a doctor in Sydney University called Dr. Philip Wadd, and he did a 3-year study in King's Cross. And what he was studying was violence in men. And what he did in his white paper, it was a really interesting read, is that when a fight broke out with one alpha male, and he went, and if that fight was in a certain proximity of other males, those males, via osmosis, would automatically join and become violent. And many of them had no prior conviction. They weren't even drunk. There was no alcohol intoxication, etc. So he was looking at this very interesting study and he won an award for it. But I think this is what comes down to with men. And I've spoken to other guys in this space. Why didn't you step in? He goes, the moment that a man fronts up to a man, he has to put his fists up. And a lot of men are not trained in any kind of martial arts or fighting. If you look at South Korea and if you look at Japan, judo,
karate.
Why are their crime rates low? Is because that guy's been doing taekwondo since grade 2, and pretty much because it's their national sport, they all have to do it in high school. And they don't know the level of that other person's fighting capacity.
Yeah.
So when they go into fight, so they don't do it.
Yeah.
And then they use other means. They use diplomacy. So we don't have that here.
Look at the first conflict resolution book, The Art of War.
Oh, I love it.
And people think it's the art of war. It's actually conflict resolution.
It is.
That was the first conflict resolution book ever read.
Written by a woman?
And it's used as one of the best business books ever.
It is. It's strategy. That's what
strategy.
It is. We need to be strategic with how we raise our young men now because they're born with the heart of a protector, not a perpetrator. They are born with the heart of a protector.
I love having a protector nature. And I've stepped in for a few female friends of mine and say, hey, mate, this ain't happening.
It's good. I need you around, Russ. Yeah. We need to copy you.
Yeah.
Carbon
and
copy you.
Adam from FACO. What a legend. Like, I remember when I protested at the George Pell funeral, and I had these people saying, oh, you hate the Catholic Church. And one bloke said, flick me a number and let's catch up. And Adam said, just flick him mine too and we'll both catch up and we'll see what he's got to say. To the point of people, I don't know, people are like, the Catholic Church has got a lot to answer.
Definitely.
But there's something that's emerging that's as dangerous as the Catholic, and that's the police force. We're having serious problem with police access and porn and sexually abusing children.
Yes.
That's a serious problem, and we need accountability in the police force, and we need things put in place because it's happening more and more. It's happening every week. There's a copper getting pinched for sexually abusing, or I got one case where a young 21-year-old constable abused 3 sisters.
Because they have access to them and they have authority and they misuse power. When I was sexually abused at 16, I went to the Broadbeach police station with my mother, and 2 years prior, I'd gone through this whole thing of getting my perpetrator behind bars from the child sex abuse. And the first thing, he gaslit me and victim blamed me in that initial discussion. And I stood up and I looked at my mum and I just went, nothing's going to happen here. We need to go. I'm not putting myself through this. So it's the misogyny that comes through, thinking that if women are wearing a short skirt or look a certain way on the Gold Coast, if you're blonde and blue-eyed and you spend the weekend in a bikini, then it's your fault because you should be raped. It's that kind of thing, Russell. And even one of my sisters had a rape case as well. We've had a really bad run, the Murphy sisters. And in the courtroom, the jury was made up of 10 men. There were no women there. It's like there was no balance, there was no empathy, and they gaslit her on the stand, and the person who raped her had 2 QCs, not barristers, but QCs flown up from Melbourne.
Yeah.
And you're like, is anyone seeing this?
Yeah.
The price they paid for that is he was part of a drug cartel in Melbourne. So, yeah, it was very grave.
I think we need, though, in a judicial system, I think we need more female judges are more inclined to give perpetrators bigger sentences.
And they know that, and that's why they don't put them there. Because they're biased towards nature. Children are the epitome of nature, beauty in all of their essence. They're innocent. If you put a female, especially a mother, on that stand, she is going to protect that.
Yeah, I like seeing female judges whack.
Yeah.
There's a really good judge in Supreme Court in Brisbane called Soraya Ryan. She's amazing. She was something to do with the Royal Commission, and she's amazing, and she'll whack them. But also in compensation. So in a compensation case up there in Brisbane, the government offered 40 grand to the victim, and the victim knocked it back. Took it to trial. They won the trial, and Soraya awarded 1.4 million, and it rightly, but then they appealed it because that's their take. Queensland is, in the work I do, it is the most rotten place, and the Tasmanians will say the same. No, their state is, that's bad. Every state's bad, right? Because it's so unjust in this country for survivors, and it's so perpetrator stacked in their favour. Yeah. Everything's stacked. The sentences are stacked. The compensations, superannuation. There's just so many little nooks and crannies that they can hide in.
Yeah. I was thinking about the superannuation issue because that's the same in the land of divorce.
Yeah.
A rich husband who has had the trophy wife, let's say, for example, and I don't want to disrespect this situation, but he can hide his money in that way or hide it with his chartered accountant. And shift the money.
Trust and stuff.
And then claim bankruptcy. The woman gets nothing. As we know, there's a high rise when it comes to homeless women in Sydney in particular, and there are 50 plus. So it's the divorcees who can't get a job because ageism is real. They can't get a job. They've looked after their kids. Their skill set has declined because they haven't been looking after their own kind of wisdom and skill set because they've been raising the young, and now they're on the street. So, yeah, I agree with you. Like, light sentences need to be looked at. We need to look at the way that we can cut off the supply, which is always the finances when it comes to child sex abuse, but even the super. But the super, it's also about the super companies are making their money as they're investing and doing all their portfolio work. So if we have huge amounts of pedophiles who are now going to have their super compensating the victims, that means these super companies are going to lose out because they're going to have huge cuts of their profit being poured into that space.
When I was sentenced, I've been sentenced about 4 or 5 times, it was always, we're going to give you a sentence to deter you from future reoffending, right? That's always been that, right? That no one ever said, hey, what happened to you? But besides that point, now, if you're son or a perpetrator, we're going to take your superannuation to deter you from future reoffending. And you might lose the superannuation, then you might go back and work for 10 years. But if you offend again, we'll take that as well. I reckon that's a pretty good deterrent.
Yeah, it is. It's brilliant. And it's the same with the...
We're going to make you a homeless person like you've done to your to your victims.
Yeah.
We're going to make you live like them.
Yes.
Is that a deterrent? For what? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And there should also be something, if they are in jail, that's on their CV, getting jobs. That's 100%. What they do in America. So we have a way to just do tiny little tweaks in the law to be able to deter this activity from happening. But the powers that be are not doing it, and that makes me concerned.
I can remember a guy getting sentenced to 28 years with an on-parole period of 20 years for adduction of amphetamines as a deterrent. I've never heard of a pedophile getting that sort of sentence. They need to send out a few big ones like that.
Yeah. There are 2 big ones. I think the daycare worker in Queensland who had 1,600 cases of rape, 91 victims were identified. I believe that's the amount. His sentencing, he's still in the process of being sentenced. That'll be a very interesting one to watch because if he does not get life... then we have to rise up and say something's wrong with that. I think so. There should be mad on the street. He won't. It's Queensland. Yeah. He has to. The other one is the young 7-year-old in her ballet class in Maroubra. I think it was down there. This was a number of years ago, pre-COVID. And she went out to the bathroom after her ballet class. She was 7 years old.
I remember that.
And he
got life, didn't he?
He got life, and he died 2 years later because he had cancer. What
a shame. Hopefully it was painful.
Yes, I do hope it was painful. Horrendous, the horrendous outcome. But the reason why he got life...
Because he was on parole or something for it?
No, because there were witnesses.
Yeah.
See, the majority of abuse happens in homes.
Yeah.
The Royal Commission states that in the opening statement from the solicitors basically said in the first page, I remember reading it just going, wow, is that 66% of the survivors that came forward to testify were male. So that blows out the notion that majority of child sex abuse is on females. And the other statement was, make no mistake, we can come down hard on these institutions because they're governed by law. But the majority of child sex abuse happens in the home. Yeah. And this is what they said to be really clear. And it's true, I think Andrew Carpenter said, it was only 3% of what's really happening in Australia. The reason why that perpetrator, that pedophile, got life in jail is because he had witnesses, and witnesses were also harmed.
But I think I also think he was a repeat offender too.
He was a repeat offender, and why on earth is he out on the street if he's a repeat offender? So there's lots to change.
And I could talk to you all day. You're my people, and
I'm your person.
Yeah,
Russ.
Yeah. And I'd love to continue, and hopefully we'll get some Grace and Lula or something like that, and we'll do a few more of these sorts of things because it's something that's got to be talked about, and we've got to take the shame out of it, the shame, embarrassment out of it. And the more we talk about this, and we get people. As much as the perpetrators are trying to normalise this stuff, we've got to normalise reporting it.
Yes, and not turning a blind eye. And Lula has a solution for that with an app, which is capturing a dossier that's used against perpetrators. And I can't wait for that to come out because this gives the person who is on the sidelines who's going, instinctively, something's going on. but then they can capture something and report it. And that's what they need, black and white evidence to be able to put that person behind bars with longer sentences.
Well, let's get them in jail where they belong.
Indeed.
Louise, thank you for being on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Same to you, Russell.